British Peace Foundation, project coordinator, Reverse the Trend, and TPMW advisor for the mission of Kiribati. Today, we will hear from an esteemed group comprised of key diplomats, Benedict Kubura-Madison, a Marshallese activist, as well as Alicia Sanders-Zacher from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. For us, and the panelists here, we're highly concerned about the twin existential threats of nuclear weapons and climate change. It's a real issue for people of Kiribati who have suffered from the legacy of nuclear testing, as well as the people of Kazakhstan who have suffered from an awful amount of nuclear testing by the Soviet Union. So on that note, I would like to pass the floor to Ambassador Tiburo Sito, the permanent representative of Kiribati, who will give a few words.
Thank you, Christian. And to all of you, I will call you brothers and sisters of the planet, of our home planet, friends, great friends of the peace-loving world, the peace-loving world of the Pacific people. I come from the Pacific, Kiribati in the Pacific, and just this morning, I tried to refer to the Charter of the United Nations, Chapter 6. And that the heading of Chapter 6 talks about the disputes and all the how you settle disputes. The heading of this chapter is called, now read, Pacific Settlement of Disputes. Now just think about that. And it makes me think too, when I saw this, wow, Pacific. You could have chosen other words. You could have said European settlement of disputes, or African settlement of disputes, Asian settlement of disputes, or American settlement of disputes. No, they did not. And I think that's why I meant. I think this is why it was meant that Kiribati should be in this. Of course, in the history, you know, Kiribati, one of those countries where testing was done, nuclear testing, which were carried out by our great friends. I always say great friends, they are still our friends. We do make mistakes sometimes in history, but great friends like United States, Great Britain, they decided to carry out nuclear tests. In those days, maybe they were not guilty, maybe they were trying to do something beautiful for the world. Maybe, I don't know. What was in the mind of those who say, let us go and use, start, testing, experimenting with this thing called nuclear material, uranium or plutonium, whatever it was, the element they found and they started experimenting. This be good. Be good for what? To make the world a better place, I guess. That was the thinking. I guess they should have been thinking like that, otherwise they would be guilty. So I'd like to imagine they were trying to do something. At that time, okay, it was just after maybe years of wars in the Pacific, in Europe. That's the time, 1956, 57, about 10 years after those wars in Europe and the Pacific. And so they thought, and of course there was a bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which of course was terrible. And we don't want to hear the story, it's a terrible story, but maybe these scientists, and these were tasked by the government, you're going to try this and do something on this, build weapons to defend the United States, to defend the people of the world. So that's the start of the story. That's why Kiribati is in this movement, because we were affected. About 500 people on the island, on Christmas Island, now called Christmas. That's where the British start bringing in people from UK, some Australians, some New Zealanders, some Fijians. We were there, just there looking after the island. We were doing our fishing and cutting copper and trying to go on with life. And then this thing exploded. People were not warned, of course. They were given trampolines to cover them. Don't dare lift this. Let the thing finish and then you can come out of the trampoline. What happened to our people? They were so good now, I guess. Well, how do we backtrack when there are people locked into this? Because it's good money making machine. You make a lot of money if you invest in this thing. Not when you invest in fish, when you invest in coconuts. No, you won't make too much money. To make good money, you invest in weapons. This is the thinking nowadays of people who are after money. This is my worry. Is it possible to stop this? Are the governments in charge of these enterprises? No, they're in the private hands. They're not controlling space, they're controlling the digital. The private is there. We government come to you and try to do something, but they're already ahead of us. So how do we, people, peace-loving people don't want fighting, we don't want killing. We want happy world, happy for all, peaceful, a world without nuclear stuff. So, this is the message I can give. I think Kazakhstan, we're working together on this. I think Alicia, I think I can. These are the people, many people working for many years, even as I joined. But now we're joining, we're going to be very serious. We're not going to just do the talking, another 10 years talking, and people just laugh. As we talk, some people are laughing because they don't want to stop. They want to catch some people. So how do we work on this side, on my side, and there are human beings on the other side. So let's hope that one day we will celebrate the end of all this. May I call it a nonsense? A stupidity, human stupidity? May I call it something of the past? And this is the problem that I see. So with this, I thought I end up, towards the end, I would end up with a little song. I'm always inspired.
Okay, at the end we can do...
Yeah, okay. At the end, a little song, I'll end it up. A little song just to say we are together. Thank you.
Thank you. Who is an accomplished diplomat of Kazakhstan. He has been serving as a permanent representative of the Republic of Kazakhstan to the United Nations since October of 2020. Prior to his current assignment, he served as his country's ambassador to the Netherlands since 2016. And then from 2013 to 2016, he served as an advisor to the President of Kazakhstan. And from 2007 to 2016, he was head of the Presidential Administration's Foreign Policy Center. So I would like to pass the floor to him. We'll give a few words.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I will speak a little bit more formally, but I promise I will add my informal non-paper part to this. But we are now holding this side event on the sideline of the entity one, which will last for another 2 weeks, so we're still on the way. We are still positive despite some political signals that we've heard about the unpredictability of this kind of events. There are some countries that do not believe in nuclear sound, but I think we should continue our work. So I'm honored to make some observations today so that we can take action to counter the existential threat of nuclear weapons and their testing. We'll also collectively shine the spotlight on critical issues of victim assistance, environmental remediation, and international cooperation to mitigate the devastation and threat. Before I begin, I extend my gratitude to our friends and partners from Kiribati, Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, Reverse the Trend, Save Our People, Save Our Planet, as well as the Marshallese Educational Initiative and Prospect Hill Foundation for organizing this most relevant discussion with us. Nuclear testing has found harmful health and environmental consequences, including the contamination of food, water supply, atmosphere, and the climate with unprecedented changes. As you know, for 4 decades, 456 explosions were carried out at the St. Galagins test site in Kazakhstan, the second largest of its kind in the world. It occupies a vast territory of 18,000 square kilometers, equivalent to the size of the states like Slovenia or Kuwait. Also, during the 5 years from 1957 to 1962, the United Kingdom and the United States have tested 33 nuclear weapons on the Malden and Kiritimati Islands in Kiribati, which led to devastating long-term health and environmental destruction. The unethical, unhumane experiments of nuclear testing on both locations caused irreparable damage to human well-being, genetic mutations, congenital disabilities, and terminal illness, thereby resulting in high morbidity and mortality in the local population. Millions of people continue to suffer from the aftermath even today. The closure of the nuclear test site in Kazakhstan on August 29, 1991, along with the renunciation of our nuclear arsenal, the fourth largest in the world at that time, was a global political paradigm shift. Our decision was so significant that it led to the eventual silencing of other major test sites around the world. Thus, Kazakhstan paved the way to ending nuclear testing through various civil society movements. At the same time, the massive and urgent task of rehabilitating infected citizens and large tracts of territories came to the fore. We therefore converted the test site into a scientific research installation for safeguarding human health and safety. A multi-level security system has been created to ensure the reliable protection of hazardous facilities as well as projects for the rehabilitation of contaminated areas. Dear friends, in the light of grave consequences of nuclear weapons and testing, Kazakhstan especially urges nuclear armed states to pledge never to wage a nuclear war and make a commitment to finally eliminate nuclear weapons by 2045, the centennial of the United Nations. Seems like a long time from now, but we're talking about 23 years. Somebody says, well, it's kind of too short, we're talking about big task, but it's 23 years. The nuclear weapons were developed and tested, I would say within 10 years. The Germans started and Americans picked up and the Soviets then first tested. 10 years to develop and test nuclear weapons. We have 23 years now with the international awareness and science. I think it is very, very possible if we have political will, social society, NGOs, and general understanding that it is possible. So I think this is something we should aspire for at least 2045. Bring that up, speak about this date, because no one talks about date. They always talk about nuclear, disarmament. Let's set up a deadline. Let's work. If we succeed, we succeed. If not, at least we can reconsider, but do it like a step-by-step process. This world must not forget that the reliance on nuclear arsenal can never ensure strategic security, but only prompt asymmetric response, which gravely cross lines with no return inside. We welcome the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. It is an important signal indicating the readiness of the majority of UN member states to take concrete actions to combat nuclear threat. Furthermore, the TPNW is also essential for effectively implementing the NPT. Kazakhstan and Kiribati have proposed to highlight the importance of promoting and implementing Articles 6 and 7 of the TPNW. In cooperation with our prominent experts from the academia and civil society, our delegations in New York have prepared a working paper and submitted it for inclusion as a substantive part of the outcome document of the first meeting of state parties to the TPNW, which was held in June in Vienna, Austria. Our countries are working to create awareness on the impact of global radiation caused by nuclear testing, resulting in almost irrevocable consequences for people and the planet. Thus, the humanitarian imperative should include recognition, accountability, monitoring, and future prevention, in addition to the current care, compensation, and remediation. I also simultaneously invite experts, academia, and diverse scientific communities around the world to further research into long-standing intergenerational impact, the impact of fast-developing technologies to overcome the enormous scale of future catastrophes for human health, environment, and economy, especially in the light of more sophisticated and advanced nuclear weapons that the world continues to develop today. Our urgent task is thus to introduce legislative measures, strategies, resources, and human capacity building for the current and future challenges. especially mobilizing emergency measures and global rapid response mechanisms for which we are very ill prepared, to be realistic. Most of all, it is important to let the world know that nuclear weapons are contrary to international humanitarian law. Since victim assistance is most crucial in the case of our country, because a lot of people suffer from nuclear testing without being aware and knowing that they're exposed to that, our efforts should also be focused on all fronts, from physical, mental, and psychosocial well-being to financial compensation. All this requires enormous, massive funding, so efforts should be made by the international community to raise resources for technical equipment, projects, knowledge sharing, and technical assistance. Full attention must be given to setting up the proposed international trust fund, which would address all the critical issues mentioned above. At this critical juncture of human history, with Ukraine, rhetorics, we know that we are very close to the edge. Secretary General of the United Nations said that we are one miscalculation from nuclear war. We hope that all states, international organizations, civil society groups, survivors, and affected communities will suggest precise, realistic, and feasible guidelines for the way forward. This must be done together with the wide involvement of women and local communities, on whose wisdom we can draw upon, as well as youth, the stewards of our tomorrow. And now I just would like to go for the informal part. The topic of today's item is twin existential threats. So we're talking about nuclear threat and climate change. I didn't really touch upon climate change because a lot of it is spoken. Everyone knows what climate change is about and what harm it can cause. So, as in one of my previous size events that I took part in, I said there is a discrepancy between the awareness about climate change and nuclear disarmament. It's strange that whereas nuclear threat is, I think, more dangerous and more imminent than climate change, because climate change, with all due respect for the people who work in this area, can take decades to really affect and really cause catastrophic impact on people. Nuclear war can end everything in 1 week. So if you compare to one is more imminent, both are very dangerous. And the climate change does not really affect nuclear disarmament at all. It's separate. But if the weapons will be used, it can speed up the environmental changes, the heating of the planet, dust, the hurricanes, all these kind of events that can happen after the use of nuclear weapons. So these two.
Please try again.
There's still existential threats exist, but what I'm trying to say, that's very, they exist. One is larger scale, more known to the public, but I would say it's there, but it has some time to develop. Another is more imminent, more dramatic, and more harmful if it will happen, but people are not aware of that. And that takes me to the next point about the involvement of youth and larger population. I was asking the other day my colleagues a question: do we know about any celebrity, movie star, pop singer, politician, leave them alone, the celebrities who speak about nuclear disarmament? Can you name me one actor, Hollywood actor, who says we have to stop it? But every second of them speaks about, climate change, glaciers, tigers, desert, because it's a hype. But we have to create this hype about nuclear disarmament as well. 30 years ago, Greenpeace, Sea Shepherd, all these NGOs, the people who really care about environment, they were in minority, raising the awareness. Politicians didn't talk about environment. No one talked about climate change. But now this is the topic. Somehow these people made it so big. They put it on the table of politicians. So now for politicians, not to mention climate change is the end of political career. It's just a topic you have to speak about. Or sometimes they don't even know what is in the depths of, but they have to. We have to make nuclear disarmament, nuclear war, and threat of nuclear weapons one of these topics. They have to talk about it. It has to come from within. And the last point, I was very happy. Yesterday I went to the movie with my kids and I saw a preview of the movie called Oppenheimer. Hollywood making this huge movie, which is coming in 2023, with just the line of great actors speaking about Oppenheimer, Manhattan Project, how they created this. It's going to be a Hollywood blockbuster. And I think this is a signal. I hope a lot of young people will go, to the next episode of Star Wars, to Wakanda Forever, but they will also go to Oppenheimer. Because I was sitting in the movie and I saw young people. I'm not going. They are not interested in Oppenheimer because it just doesn't ring the bell for them. But I hope that this topic will be more and more on the top of the agenda. I thank you very much for being here today, and I wish you all a productive discussion. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for those remarks. I would like to note, and this has been mentioned, that both Kiribati and Kazakhstan are serving as the co-chairs of the intersessional group on victims assistance, environmental remediation, international cooperation and assistance of the TPMW during the intersessional period. I think that's very important for both countries. So now I would like to pass the floor to Benedict Kabua-Madison, who is the director of the Marshallese Educational Initiative, who was born on Majuro Atoll in the Marshall Islands. And Madison migrated with his family to Arkansas at the age of 6. He is coordinating programming focused on nuclear issues and climate change, including Nuclear Victims Remembrance Day, and a series of events to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the first nuclear test on Bikini Atoll, a youth event and panels that focus on nuclear and climate issues related to the health of indigenous peoples. He has also spoken about the ongoing consequences of the nuclear legacy and climate change on the Marshall Islands at numerous conferences in the US and internationally, including at the first meeting of state parties, the TPMW in Vienna, Austria, the International Peace Bureau World Peace Congress, the 1-2SL Annual Conference, and the Pacific Coast Branch of the American Historical Society has also participated in numerous webinars and events, including nuclear colonialism and the Age of the BAM Treaty, from New Mexico to the Marshall Islands and across the Pacific. And he is also, in the fall, spoke at Reverse the Trends event on youth initiative to reverse the trend of existential threats that was held at the Yale Club of New York City, amongst others. And Reverse the Trend is also proud that he is an advisor of the initiative. So please, Benedict.
Thank you. I should have sent you a shorter bio. Well, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I wish to thank all of the organizers for hosting this event and for the opportunity to speak today. For a few of you in this room, you may have already heard this statement in Vienna, but for many of you, I'm pleased to share it with you all. I can still remember it like yesterday. My elementary school principal pulled my first grade classmates and me out of class to gather at the school library for a show and tell that she wanted to share with us. To my surprise, the presentation was about her trip to the Marshall Islands that year. She showed us photos and talked about the 6,000-mile journey from Arkansas to the Marshall Islands. For a trip that long, patience was not on her side. She was eager to set foot on Marshallese soil, but had to make a layover in Hawaii for a couple of hours to connect flights. And off she went on her second flight. From Hawaii to the Marshall Islands, they could see clouds and the ocean below them. No sign of islands yet. She waited and waited until out of nowhere, there they were, God's long-lost emerald necklaces floating on the water as if they had just risen from the depths of the sea, as the plane was making its way to Midero, the capital of the Marshall Islands. When I saw the photos, it was a very emotional moment. As a first grader, I did not have access to the computer because first graders did not use computers then. My parents had those old Nokia phones that did not have access to the internet yet. And so seeing my homeland again for the first time in photos, with the beautiful white sandy beaches, the lush green forests, in the blue turquoise water after leaving a few years prior gave me tears and a big smile. It was comforting to know at a young age that my homeland was still there. Even though I am physically here in the States, thousands of miles away, my heart is still back home. The Marshall Islands have been the home of my people for more than 4,000 years. We have survived living on the islands for this long, even though they are isolated with scarce resources. But I credit our survival to the cultural values of our ancestors that we, their descendants, are still embracing today. The cultural values of love, respect, kindness, and togetherness are essential aspects of our close-knit society. Our cultural values are not only reserved for people, but also the environment. Marshallese culture, if one takes the time to learn about it, is also based on sustainability and conservation. For example, traditional Marshallese canoes are made from natural materials such as coconut fibers and breadfruit trees, to name a few. Several other examples are hand-woven baskets, necklaces, hats, bags, navigational stick charts, and many other handicrafts made from natural materials too. And when making canoes, homes, or crafts in general, Marshallese artisans and builders are careful not to overproduce to ensure enough resources for future generations. It is also the same with fishing and gathering food. People, especially those living on the outer islands, continue to embrace the lifestyle of our ancestors. Unfortunately, the sustainable Marshallese way of life is under threat. The Marshall Islands are on the front line of the climate crisis, and while others may think climate change is years or decades away, it is already impacting vulnerable places like the Marshalls. Yet, we are only responsible for a small, teeny-tiny bit of the total global emissions. Relatives and friends back home have said that some of the beaches that my family and I used to enjoy 20 years ago are no longer there. The islands are prone to extreme drought and flooding conditions that have worsened over the years, leading to food and water shortages for the people. The Marshall Islands is also faced with the issues of coral bleaching due to our oceans warming up and overfishing by foreign fishing vessels. These environmental problems and exploitations of our resources will continue to force more Marshallese to migrate to the U.S. to seek better opportunities for themselves and their families. These are not all of the environmental problems in the Marshall Islands, though. Marshallese are faced with the stark reality that we may someday lose our homeland if the world continues the path of destruction. The islands are on average 6 feet above sea level, and to make matters worse, the nuclear legacy left behind by the United States is still there. Between 1946 and 1958, the U.S. used the islands to test 67 nuclear weapons, or equivalent to 7,200 Hiroshima bombs. In the mid-1970s, the U.S. built a concrete dome on Enewewa, one of the 2 islands used for nuclear testing. They dumped nuclear waste into the structure, leaking nuclear contaminants into the fragile environment. Scientists have warned the Marshallese government that if the islands were underwater today, the dome would break open and release its deadly contents. As a result of the nuclear testing program, the Marshall Islands and the U.S. signed the first Compact of Free Association in 1986, allowing Marshallese to migrate to the U.S. for employment, education, and other reasons. We are not only experiencing the ecological effects of the nuclear test, but biological as well. We have some of the highest rates of cancer, diabetes, and other nuclear-related diseases. And during the pandemic, the Marshallese community suffered greatly. Many members of our community, many of them elders, passed away due to COVID-19. And data have shown that Marshallese are more prone to getting the COVID-19 due to health issues that we have inherited from the nuclear legacy. The Marshall Islands has a long history of environmental advocacy, dating back to the early years of the U.S. Trust Territory, an agreement between the United States and the United Nations that solidified the U.S.'s use of the Marshall Islands for nuclear testing. Together with allies worldwide, Marshallese leaders and community members have been fighting for nuclear and climate justice for decades. With the help of the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, the Marshall Islands sued the 9 nuclear weapon states in 2014. Although the case was not won, the issue received international attention and support. The following year, desperate for bold climate actions, The Marshall Islands, under the late Tony DeBruyn, brought together 190 plus countries to support the Paris Climate Agreement through a group the RMI created called the High Ambition Coalition. The Marshallese Educational Initiative collaborates with the Reverse the Trend, the RMI National Nuclear Commission, and affected communities to continue raising awareness about the effects of nuclear and climate through panels, presentations, advocacy work, and webinars. Recently, the Marshall Islands and the United States governments restarted renegotiating the next Compact of Free Association. It is my hope and that of my people, especially Marshallese youth, that the next compact will address many of the problems facing us, including the twin issues of nuclear and climate change. Land is an essential part of Marshallese culture. The total land area in the Marshall Islands is 70 square miles, or about the size of Washington, D.C. It is all the land that we have. For us Marshallese, time is running out. The U.S., the world, well, all of us must do more to create a nuclear-free and livable planet for all to not only survive, but thrive. And so that future Marshallese generations will live with the comfort of knowing that they have a home to go back to, and so that they can preserve and protect their culture for many years to come. Marshallese youth today have taken up the responsibility of sharing or raising awareness about the climate and nuclear issues that we are facing. And one of the ways that we're doing that is through artwork. Behind me, you'll see paintings that were done by Marshallese youth in Arkansas, high school and college students. And these paintings are paintings of how they feel about the issues of climate and nuclear. So hopefully towards the end of this event, hopefully you can come and take a closer look at these paintings. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benedict. I want to thank the ambassadors for being now. Thank you so much. So next, we have Alicia Samuel-Zachar, who is the Policy and Research Coordinator at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. She directs and coordinates research on the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons, and generally nuclear weapons policy as well. Please, Alicia.
Well, thank you so much, Christian, and to all the organizers for inviting me here to speak. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank Kiribati and Kazakhstan for their leadership on advancing victim assistance and environmental remediation under the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which I'll focus my remarks on today. Because I think this body of work really underscores the twin threats of nuclear weapons and climate change, and the need for urgent action to address the harm that's already been done to nations around the world that have been disproportionately impacted and suffered the consequences of decades of nuclear testing and climate change. And civil society has been a key partner with governments in advancing this body of work. And I think, in thinking of the hope for a better tomorrow, there's a lot of really exciting progressive action on this that will be happening in years to come, which I'll discuss. So the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW, is the first international instrument to include these positive obligations to assist victims of nuclear weapons use and testing, and to begin to remediate contaminated environments. That's in Articles 6 and 7 of the treaty. This treaty was adopted in 2017 and entered into force in 2021. And just in June, states, together with civil society, met in Vienna for the first meeting of the states parties. And there they adopted the treaty's first action plan, which is a roadmap for states parties to advance towards nuclear disarmament and implementation of the treaty. And this Vienna Action Plan is really significant, not only as the only one to be adopted on nuclear weapons in more than a decade, given the failure of this treaty, the NPT, to adopt a consensus outcome document, but also because it really breaks new ground with strong and innovative commitments on so many issues, from inclusion of civil society to gender and disarmament, to setting a deadline for nuclear disarmament for when nuclear armed states join the treaty, to, of course, these new and groundbreaking obligations on victim assistance and environmental remediation. This is really the first kind of framework of solidarity for states to provide victim assistance and environmental remediation to address nuclear harm, and it builds on the precedent of other humanitarian disarmament treaties like the Mine Ban Treaty and the Cluster Munitions Convention. And I'll go a bit into kind of what was agreed to and decided, because I think it's again a really progressive and important plan of action that can help to create a better tomorrow. So it really kind of reinforces and adds to the requirements that are in the treaty's Articles 6 and 7, articulating that implementation must be based on principles of accessibility, inclusivity, non-discrimination, and transparency, and importantly, in coordination with affected communities. And that assistance should be provided in a manner that's age and gender sensitive. All states agreed to, kind of as the first steps, to establish a government representative, a focal point, who will be responsible for taking forward the work already 3 months after the adoption of this plan, to look at their national legislation and see if new legislation is needed to further implement and supplement what's needed to implement these obligations. To, as was mentioned, to examine how to establish an international trust fund to ensure that this is a framework of solidarity, that there's international cooperation and assistance to take forward these obligations. And to think about reporting, how can states, for kind of this principle of transparency, report on what they've been able to do to take forward these obligations. For states that have considered themselves to be affected by nuclear weapons use and testing, there was a commitment to begin an assessment of the needs of people affected by nuclear weapons use and testing, and needs for remediation of contaminated environments, and to already complete initial assessments by the next meeting of states parties. That will be at the end of 2023. And to also begin putting together national plans for implementing these obligations, including thinking of budgets and timeframes. And for those familiar with the NPT process and action plans, this is really, I think, remarkable that states have committed to really put this together and think about the details in this way. And of course, all other states, even those who don't consider themselves affected by nuclear weapons use and testing, in a position to do so, commit to provide technical and material and financial assistance to affected states parties. Again, this kind of framework of solidarity of action. So I think it's worth noting, and I'm speaking as a member of civil society, how inclusive all this process has been and will continue to be. So I think it's useful for states and civil society to know kind of what's been adopted and to be a part of the process. And this was really reinforced in this action plan. It was evident, I think, at the meeting itself and reinforced for the future in this action plan. When states committed to engage with all relevant stakeholders, including civil society, affected communities, indigenous peoples, and youth, and work cooperatively to advance these articles. In particular, they committed to closely consult with and actively involve and disseminate information to affected communities at all stages of the victim assistance and environmental remediation process, and to draw on the input of all relevant stakeholders, including, as you said, civil society, affected communities, indigenous peoples, and youth, and to ensure not only that they're closely cooperating, but again, facilitating their active participation, including taking into account the different needs of people in communities affected by nuclear weapons and in indigenous peoples' communities. So I know it's a lot to kind of go through all these commitments, but I think it's hopeful to look at all that has been already committed to and agreed to, and it creates a robust framework of work going forward. That whether you're joining as a society or as a state, it's a process that you can be involved in and contribute to have hope for a better tomorrow and to address some of the devastating humanitarian and environmental legacy of nuclear weapons harm that is linked to, I think, the climate change crisis that we face. And I think all states should join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, be a part of this process, and as a society, we'll continue to urge our governments to do so.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for talking about the importance of the TPM review. So now we have about 25 minutes or so for Q&A. So I'd like to open up the floor. Please, everyone, please your comments. Please, when I call on you, please mention your name and affiliation.
Thank you very much, Kristen. I'm Alan Ware from Aotearoa, New Zealand, from the Pacific, and also represent the World Future Council and Parliamentarians for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. And I have a question from my colleague from Kazakhstan, and also a comment from my brothers from the Pacific. My question is very interested in the proposal put forward by Kazakhstan to get a concrete commitment from states to the complete elimination of nuclear weapons no later than 2045, the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. This has been picked up by civil society in the civil society field, signed by over 1,400 representatives of civil society to the NPT. My question is Kazakhstan advancing this as something to try and get into the final outcome of the NPT and also the post-2030 Sustainable Development Goals which are being negotiated at the United Nations at the moment? And for my brothers from the Pacific, thank you very much for talking about the two twin aspects of existential threats, nuclear weapons and climate change, which we feel very closely in the Pacific. And also to the leadership of Tony Broom, who not only led at the Paris conference, but also led the case in the International Court of Justice against 9 nuclear states. At that time, Tony Broom said the next case in the court should be one on climate. And this is now happening, again thanks to Pacific Island students fighting climate change. They've picked up on Tony Broom's idea, and I've encouraged the Pacific Island governments to take it forward. So tomorrow in the afternoon, next door, conference room B in the afternoon, we'll hear from the ambassador of Vanuatu, who has initiated the General Assembly resolution this year in the General Assembly to take the issue of climate change to the International Court of Justice, again making the connections between this coming up case that they're doing and the one that the Pacific Islands led in the International Court of Justice against nuclear weapons in 94 to 96, where the Pacific Islands played a key role in getting the conclusion from the court that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is generally illegal. And I commend the Marshall Islands because I think it was a testimony of Lijon Eknilan in the International Court of Justice about the impact of the nuclear tests that brought the court, which is, like judges from nuclear weapon states and allied states, nearly to tears and conclude in their classic statement from that decision that the destructive impact of nuclear weapons cannot be contained in time or space. And I believe the Pacific Islands Initiative on Climate Change is going to get them to do the same with regard to climate change. Thank you very much. And flyers for the program next door at the end of the table coming tomorrow. Thank you.
Would you like to respond?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ware, for your question. Reminding us about the initiative by Kazakhstan to get rid of the nuclear weapons by the simultaneous anniversary of the United Nations by 2045. In order to achieve this goal, we proposed a number of initiatives. And one of them, our active role and involvement in the process of the CPNW, which which has a provision in a deadline for the elimination of nuclear weapons. And we discussed the deadline term for elimination of nuclear weapons. And most of the scientists and experts outlined a 10 years deadline. And then we told them that it should be not 10, but up to 10. So that means earlier than 10 years. And, so it's been agreed, and one of the main outcomes of the first meeting of the Space Flight Study TPNW was to set up a deadline. Now, in the 2022, so that means that we have 23 years to go. And that means that we have a number of nuclear weapons possessing states, each term of 10 years. So we might not be able to come to this deadline with a fulfilled goal. But still we have a hope, and we will keep continuing. And I saw a project made of NGOs from Japan. They are proposing a post-SDGs agenda, post-agenda, so a new future agenda. And I saw the date of 2045, which coincides with our initiative. So SDGs deadline is 2030, and for the next cycle, 2045 will be elimination of nuclear weapons. At the same time, we should be realistic that it's difficult for countries possessing nuclear weapons to, just to eliminate it, get rid of it. We understand their position as well. So to some of them, it gives a privileged status in the Security Council, but they have a privileged responsibility for the future of our generations. That is why our solution is to continue our dialogue, and the involvement of civil society and younger generations will be helpful. And we hope that people in this room will be in the next 10 years, maybe earlier, decision makers of their countries. Maybe they will help to achieve this goal. And the reason of our involvement on the positive obligations, I provide such a simple example. Imagine nuclear weapons possessing states who are testing weapons. They are a child which broke a toy, and a toy is a country where they tested the weapons. One parent reminds him that this is not a good thing to break the toy, and this is the whole international community. And the other parent is Kazakhstan and Kyrgyz, which comes and goes to repair this toy. But some toys cannot be repaired as the ground zero, as the epicenter of the testing. That is why we are trying to do what we can do, but we don't have a clue. We will just do what we can. And the Positive Obligations Initiative is to solve the problems of the past. Your task and our task is to prevent these mistakes in the future. This child's mistake. So 2045 is one of such initiatives. We have a number of other initiatives. One of them is the 29th of August. This is the ban of nuclear testing. We have the most important is TPNW, and as Alicia and Ambassador Tito mentioned, this treaty provides a legal basis for victim assistance and environmental remediation. We had, of course, previous treaties like NPT, CTBT, but now a newborn treaty provides a legal basis not only for banning nuclear weapons, but also providing an opportunity to solve the historical mistakes. And I hope at this conference we will have Kazakhstan and Kiribati propose to include a reference to these activities in the final document. And our idea is to provide you briefings. For example, Christian mentioned that some countries like Australia, they are not aware of our activities. And they were surprised why two countries completely different, coming from different backgrounds, why they're together. And we say that there are two main regions in the world where nuclear testing took place: the Pacific Ocean region and then Kazakhstan as a part of the Soviet testing. And, we have a negative and bad experience, but this is our history, and we would like to make our future bright, prosperous, and safer for next generations. And we appreciate other countries' involvement and support. And one of the practical measures, we usually have, political discussions, but one of the practical outcomes would be the trust fund, which we can utilize for experience exchange, providing more support, including technical support, equipment. And now we are discussing how to establish this fund. And we call it fund, maybe we'll call it in the future, we'll call it as a unit, I don't know. We are now just collecting all these proposals. And we so much cherish and appreciate the involvement of civil society, and ICANN and ICRC's role is crucial in this regard. And we have youth representatives, promoting this idea. So all of you can join us. We have a transparent and open group. The only condition is that you provide concrete and useful, realistic proposals. So I'd like to pass the floor to Ambassador Tito to continue, and I hope that was useful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, I just endorse whatever you said here by my colleague here. Yeah, it's all true. We're working hard, and we really appreciate the support of many who gave us a lot of information. So much we never knew, now we know. And that enabled us, that empowered us to move forward together. The set of proposals, we were very happy with the member states, the states parties there agreeing to it, and then asking us to stay on. I mean, this is a great privilege. So now we're in charge of this. So please contact us anytime. Our doors are open anytime, 24 hours. And any idea you have, please let us have it. We treasure every idea. I should also add that in addition to the trust fund, which was part of that working paper, which was approved by the first meeting of state parties, we're also coming up with a scientific advisory group. A group of scientists. Okay, there are scientists in the IAE and whatever, but this is specifically to address the communities affected. If communities there are affected and they want to know whether the water is safe, or the fish is safe, or the coconut they eat, or the breadfruit, and they're not too sure. Now, the science is kind of debating all the time. It depends which science you're having. If it comes from a nuclear state, then they say, it's safe, it's okay, you can have it. But if it comes from an NGO, which has no political alliance, then to me, you got to have a science that is trustworthy, independent of the politics. And so, as a result of what we've achieved together with you in Vienna, now we're going to set up scientific advisory group. So we need scientists, good scientists, top scientists, who can really tell us, if we say, go to martial art, just see that dome. Is it safe? Now the dome is kind of leaking, and the sea level coming up, and very soon it will be part of the ocean. And all of us, who feed from the ocean will be affected. So it's important we send a scientific advisory group there to examine, to do analysis, peer-reviewed analysis, to make sure that what they tell us is true. No more debate about it. So this is another thing that I thought we announced it here as part of the good work that many people have done, poured it on us, and then we took it to Vienna, and now we can say we've got it. So we're moving forward, right? All of us are moving forward. Hopefully one day we will celebrate the end, celebrate the day, no more of this nonsense. Totally free. So, but I'll give it to Benedict to comment on the Pacific side of things.
Just to add on to Ambassador Suku's, I'm pleased with the fact that Vanuatu and young people are pleading the case at the international level. Hope to see more support from the Pacific Islands Forum. For countries like Kiribati and the Marshall Islands, we don't have time. Our countries are 2 meters above sea level when it comes to the climate crisis. On top of the fact that we have these nuclear histories that we're still dealing with today. Ambassador brought up the Renadone. The U.S. Congress instructed the Department of Energy to conduct an assessment on the Renadone back in 2020. And DOE came back with the same nonsense, saying that the dome is okay, it's not leaking. Our job is to make sure that we share the truth. We have yet to achieve nuclear justice for us Marshalls, as well as for other affected people. And so we'll continue to do this work, important work.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I have. Kathleen.
Thank you all so much, and I just want to echo a little bit of what Alicia was referring to, this really extraordinary collaboration between civil society, academics, and delegates to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Ambassador Sito, it's nice to see you again. I have to respectfully disagree with you that I think the United States and the British government knew what they were doing when they were testing nuclear weapons. And I find that a very shameful thing to say as a U.S. citizen. And I think, therefore, it is incumbent upon those of us who live in nuclear-armed states to make sure that the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is successful. And with that, to work with you and ICANN and others to assure its success. The first meeting of states parties in Vienna was certainly a great success and move forward. We look forward to interprofessional work in between this and the next meeting of states parties. So I wanted to share that heartfelt belief. And I also wanted to ask Benedict and Alicia if you would comment on some of the education initiatives that both NEI and ICANN are doing, how we can involve youth. I'm here with Robert Kringquist with UMass New York Youth Offshore Stories. So how can we engage young people? What are you all doing?
Well, thanks so much, Kathleen. And I think as you're well aware, we have many partners here in the U.S. and abroad who are working very closely on youth education. So I think a lot of ICANN's work is to lift up the work of partner organizations around the world that are doing this important work. But I think one thing when I was going through the recommendations, and I think this was due to the advocacy of so many of our youth partners But I think it's really notable that in the Vienna Action Plan there are specific references to the involvement and inclusion and active participation of youth. And I think that sets a really strong basis and standard to ensure that they are part of these conversations. And I think we're very lucky to have partners like Shanghai and Ambassador Sito, who are also so interested in engaging and involving youth in the process. I think that we're still, for now, I guess, focused on, of course, getting the NPT through to the end. But as we're looking at the intersessional process, I think it's integral that there are youth representatives involved in the conversations with governments, and that's, I think to speak to that work in particular, I think that will be very important.
The U.S. RMI nuclear legacy is it's a history that is not taught in the classrooms across this country. That is not mentioned in any of the American history books. But it's more than just Marshallese and American history, it's also world history. As I mentioned earlier, the United States, the United Nations is also complicit in the fact that the agreement between the U.S. and the UN placed the Marshall Islands under the Trust Territory of the Pacific Islands, a strategic treaty that pretty much gave the U.S. full control of the Marshall Islands for military and nuclear purposes. But this knowledge is not just unknown to non-Marshalese. It's also unknown to many young Marshalese across the world. And so one of our roles at NEI, one of my roles at NEI is to ensure that this education is passed down to my peers and the next generations. One of the things that we've done this year is a Marshalese Youth Academy. It's a 10-week program that we piloted earlier this year, where we taught Marshalese students the history, the culture, as well as the language. And of course, the issues that we're dealing with when it comes to climate and nuclear issues. Many of them were either born in the Marshall Islands at a very young age and moved here to the U.S., or they were born here in the U.S. And the Compact of Free Association that I mentioned, the way I view it is it's an imperialist policy, one that did not prepare my people when we moved here to the United States. We are not citizens of the United States. We are not migrants. We're non-migrants. And so we fall through the cracks in so many ways. There are so many programs, federal programs, state programs that we're not eligible for. I've had people ask me, why don't Marshalese become U.S. citizens? And my take on that is that, we were forced to sacrifice our health and our homeland for the United States to become the powerful country that it is today. And so why should we become U.S. citizens to be eligible for what we deserve? And so we continue to raise these issues with the United States, especially now with the compact of negotiations happening between our governments. But again, hopefully something good comes out of these negotiations.
Thank you for feeling sorry on behalf of the American people. I've met many people also in Britain who feel sorry, like you say, of what happened. But I say, okay, that was a long time, maybe not you, maybe your grandfather, great-grandfather was in charge. But I also try to cultivate a spirit of coming together, no longer seeing as these guys did terrible things to us and we go out of the war zone and kill other people. I mean, we know that's a rule of war for a long, long time. But in the case of the Hiroshima bomb. I mean, it just broke all the laws at the time. All the rules of war were broken, and people suffered. So this is what we're talking about. So we involve the young people now and give us we talk about involving young people. I spend time on the Zoom with Christians, being a young guy. He pushed me to young people. And, I'm always doing something with young people here in the Pacific, Zoom. Try to tell them, yeah, come on, move forward. You must know what happened. But I'm also asking them, move forward in a way that you embrace the people around you. Don't move forward and then continue the segregation, continue the wars. We won't make the world a better place. If you all move forward in compartments, let's come together. That's why I sang the song there, and I might sing it at the end, but let the questions first. I just want to make all of us feel one, okay? We are one big happy family for love, peace, and harmony in a world free of milky stuff. We are one big happy family. God's family are we. We are all brothers. We are all sisters. Our Father in heaven loves each one of us. That is my story. And I'm moving forward with that. And let's tell the truth of what happened. Let's not hide. And let's reform ourselves and become better human beings in the future. Thank you.
So on that note, I would like to thank everyone for coming to this really great, really important side event to hear from our esteemed experts, activists, delegates. And I would like to encourage all of you to visit the respective websites of the organizations, including the Village Peace Foundation, which is wagingthepeace.org, Reverse the Trend, Save Our People, Save Our Planet, that's RTT, reversingthetrend.org, as well as the Marshallese Educational Initiatives website, which I believe is mei.ngo, not org.ngo. And there you'll find really great information about the organization and Benedict's involvement, as well as his colleague Marcina, who's over there from MEI. And I would also really like to thank ICANN, and you can visit ICANN's website as well as icanw.org. On that note, thank you all so much, and this concludes the meeting.